Oops. All right. So welcome to the first video on investigating the taxa. So this is part one. We're going to be talking about how organisms are categorized. So your objectives, you're going to work on memorizing the taxa. Those are your groups or levels of organization that we have in taxonomy. Then you're going to be able to describe the criteria for labeling a group of organisms as a species. So there's two criteria. In order for us to say something is a species, it has to meet both criteria. Then you're going to learn the names and characteristics of our three domains, because our modern system of classification is known as the three-domain system. So scientific names, a little review for you guys. Scientific names are based on what naming system? Good. Hopefully you were able to identify that as binomial nomenclature, our two-name naming system developed by Linnaeus. All right, number two, review. Historically, animals were categorized only on morphology. What does modern classification use to classify organisms? Good. Hopefully you were able to say that it is based on evolutionary relationships. And again, morphology, just for a review, is structure, what something looks like. Last review question. Who is more related? We have Lepus arcticus, Lepus americanus, and Canis arcticus. All right, I did this one to try and trick you guys, so hopefully we were able to avoid my little trap here. So if you notice, we have two rabbits, which you can see sort of from looking at the pictures, they look more related. Now, looking at something that looks more related is a little bit of a trap, so don't necessarily go that way. But if you look over here, we have our wolf. So these two are more related, and that has to do with if you look at our taxa. So again, these are the ones that you have to memorize. So you have domain, which isn't in our picture over here, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. My suggestion, get a mnemonic device that works for you. Memorize these because you will have to know them and you'll have to know them in order. So when we're looking at how related organisms are, we start at domain and head down towards species. Now it gets it gets more specific as you move down, meaning that being in the same domain as another organism does not make you very related to them. But once you deviate from relationships to another organism, that is the last point of relation. So for example, if you are in a different phylum, so this is where you sort of separate off, and we'll put an example from up here. So here we have our coral snake and our grizzly bear. They are in the same phylum, but if you look, they're not in the same class. So this is the last level where they have a common ancestor, where they are sort of in the same group together. So even in our scientific name, if we all of a sudden find that all the way down in family, they have the same family name, which we do not have coral snakes in Ursidae, but if we did, that does not mean that they are more related because they use the same name down here as well. This is where they started to deviate, and so that's the last point of common ancestry. So if we look back here, we see that our genus is the same for our rabbits, but our wolf is in the genus Canis, meaning that it is not related to them at the Canis level. Just because they have the same species name, Arcticus, don't let that trick you. Arcticus is just used to describe the fact that they're Arctic animals, which is why they're all nice and white. All right. So taxonomy, the science of classifying organisms, is basically life's filing cabinet. So there's an estimated 8.7 million species on Earth, which does not take into account extinct species. So when you think about that number, and it's getting higher every day, because as we find new species, discover new places to look, we find more and more. So it's a massive amount of data to try and make any sense of. So to look at these 8.7 million different organisms that are hugely, vastly different from one another and try and organize them to make sense of it, very, very difficult. So the taxa and taxonomy is useful for understanding sort of general patterns, but also realize that it's an imperfect method for organizing life. So it'll give you some general guidelines, tell you some characteristics of living things, but it's not sort of a hard and true definition. It's a constantly being reworked and redone. So again, taxonomy is based on evolutionary relationships. Now, evolution is just change over time. We'll talk about evolution by natural selection, which is Darwin's theory for how evolution happens. But evolution itself just means that things are changing over time. So here's a phylogenetic tree. We have our three domains, which we'll talk about in a second. And this is showing on the y-axis that as we move along this, what's actually happening is time is passing. So here we have our common ancestor. This would be an organism that was the start of life on this planet. And then as time went on, it changed, and we had two different organisms. And then go on again, and it changes again. And so as time passes, you see that these start to branch and become more species, and we get differences and variety in life on Earth. So again, it was previously based on morphology, so what something looks like, but today classification relies heavily on DNA evidence, which makes our classification a little more precise. So what is a species? There's two criteria. The first one, organisms within a species are capable of reproducing. So you have to be able to make offspring. And the offspring must be fertile, meaning that the offspring must be able to have offspring of their own. So the example I gave you here, these are not living cockroaches, but these are American cockroaches. These ones have little pins in them, so you know they're not with us anymore. So here you would have a mom and a dad cockroach, and they can have baby cockroaches. And then when the baby cockroaches grow up, they can have babies of their own. So that tells us it's a species because it meets both criteria. So here's a little bit of a brain teaser for you guys. So here we have a male donkey and a female horse. Now, donkeys and horses are separate species, but they reproduce to make a mule. So my first question for you guys, what part of the horse and donkey scientific name lets you know that they're different species? So here we have horse, which is Equus ferus, and donkey, which is Equus asinus. Good. Hopefully you guys were able to get that they're both in the genus Equus, but they have separate species. So they are a different species. So why do you think, even though they're classified as separate species, why do you think a horse and a donkey are considered separate species if they can breed? All right, so hopefully you guys were able to get that just being able to breed and produce offspring is only half of our requirements. The offspring itself has to be able to have offspring of its own. So mules are infertile, and it has to do with the fact that horses and donkeys have different number of chromosomes. So those are the X's that form in your DNA inside your nucleus. So because they have a different number, mule ends up with 63 chromosomes, which is an odd number, which when you consider that they have to line up, it's not very good to have odd numbers. You want to have pairs. So the mule has trouble reproducing. The DNA just doesn't line up. It doesn't work for them. So they are infertile, meaning that that's why the horse and donkey are still considered a separate species. All right, here's your taxa again. All right, so in our taxa, we have the 3 domain system. So if you go back up here, you have domain at the top. So this is the least specific group, and then it's kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So we're looking at domain, which is not even shown on this one because it's an old picture. But domain would be all the way up top here above your kingdom. So here's the 3 domains. So if you look, there's archaea, eukaryota, and bacteria. So those are written in black right here, and they show, remember how before time was on our y-axis? Well, here time is passing on our x-axis. So as we move this way, time is moving on. So we have archaea right here. So they show you some pictures of your archaea bacteria. And then you have your bacteria, which is also known as your eubacteria or true bacteria domain rather. And here are some of your bacterias. And then finally, the one you guys are probably most familiar with, your eukaryota. So your plants, animal, your fungi, and your protists. And these right here are your kingdoms. And there are 6 kingdoms, 1 for bacteria, 1 for archaeobacteria, and then you have 4 for your eukaryotic organisms. So using your previous knowledge, what criteria do you think differentiates domain eukaryota from archaea and bacteria? Good. Hopefully you were able to get that it's the type of cell. So if you look at this word eukaryota, it's a eukaryotic cell, meaning that these organisms in this domain are going to be eukaryotic, made up of eukaryotic cells. So they'll have a nucleus and they'll have membranous bound organelles. So you'll have lysosomes, mitochondria, chloroplasts, all that stuff is in eukaryota. It is not in archaea and it is not in bacteria. So what you're going to do now is you are going to do a little bit of research into the different domains. So eukaryota as a domain is very distinct from bacteria. You're going to use a Prezi to learn what makes bacteria and archaeobacteria distinct enough to be classified as separate domains. All directions are in the Prezi, so read carefully. You can see me with any questions. And there is your link. You will need a notebook for this, so make sure you have that.